Hello, I'm Claire Smith and welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing a video all about reformulations. How many times have you gone to buy your favourite fragrance and then found that it's been reformulated when you open and try it? How marked was that difference? If you have been watching me for a while, you will know that I made a video about a year ago about perfume reformulation and why it happens. So I'm going to leave that video linked down below in case you haven't seen it and you would like to watch it. But today's video is going to be directly comparing three famously reformulated fragrances, and I'm going to do it in a very scientific manner. So I'm firstly going to report the results of some blind sniffing. So my husband has sprayed these fragrances on my skin, and then I've told him which one I think is the old formulation and which one I think is the new formulation. I've also had other people try these fragrances and I've asked them whether they think they're the same fragrance or whether they think that there are any differences between them. If I can tell a difference between the fragrances, I will also let you know which of these fragrances that I actually prefer, the old or the new formulation, and also which of the fragrances last the longest, if there is any difference. So in this video, I've really tried not to be biased. I've tried to be completely independent, but obviously that is really hard because I do have a preconceived idea of how these fragrances smell from my own experiences of using these perfumes. And actually with two of these fragrances, I'm very familiar with the old formulation, and with one of these fragrances, I'm very familiar with the new formulation. So there is an inherent bias there. Also, I feel like there is a massive backlash on YouTube against new formulations. So in my head, in the back somewhere, there is this feeling that I should prefer the old formulations. So I'm just going to make you aware of those kind of biases before we start. But actually, I think I'm less biased than most people here on YouTube because I am someone who tends to always look for positives. People get really cross about reformulations because, it's hurtful, isn't it? You love a fragrance and then it changes. It's just not the same anymore. And the people who come along and just try the new formulation, they don't know any the wiser, do they? So it's a very sort of from your own point of view and your own perspective of when you first tried that fragrance that really determines your opinions on reformulations to a certain degree. I think overall the results from this kind of testing are going to be exaggerated compared to perhaps testing in a more normal environment. So, when you're forensically smelling a fragrance really close up, it's very different to when you smell a fragrance in the air. Perhaps things that are not perceivable in the air are going to be a lot more perceivable on your skin close up. So with all that said, and with all that bias kind of put forward, I am just going to go through these three fragrances and tell you what I think about the differences between them. So if this kind of content interests you, then please do consider subscribing if you haven't done already, and also please like this video if you do end up liking this video. So the first fragrance is going to be Giorgio Armani Si. So Si was launched in 2013 and my older formulation bottle dates from May 2018. This may not be the original formulation, but this is the older formulation, the formulation that I have. And I also have this new formulation sample from 2022. So I'm just going to talk through the results of the blind sniffing and also tell you about how these two smell. So in the blind sniffing, I correctly identified the old and new formulations 3 out of 3 times. I actually thought these were quite distinctively different fragrances. I found it really easy to discern between the older formulation that I'm obviously more familiar with and the new formulation. They seemed like completely different fragrances to me. They do have echoes of each other, but the notes are very much completely out of balance in the new formulation compared with the old formulation. They're almost like they're sort of jumbled in a way. And actually when I passed these two fragrances to 2 other people to blind sniff them, one of those people actually said that they thought they were 2 entirely different fragrances. So that just goes to show that people who don't smell fragrances all the time and, aren't looking forensically for differences even think that these 2 fragrances smell really very different to each other. So comparing the two, I'd say that the new one is much lighter, much brighter, much fruitier, and just generally the friendlier fragrance in the opening. It just feels very much more modern than the older formulation. I think the new formulation as well has a sort of almost grapefruity opening as well as that blackcurrant. It's just a very citric and almost sparkly feeling in the beginning of the fragrance. The older formulation is much darker and much heavier. There's much more patchouli and it's a much stronger rose, musk and vanilla fragrance in the beginning. As these two fragrances dry down, the new formulation does get more similar to the old formulation, but they still do stay pretty different and they still are very discernible in the dry down. As these two progress, the new formulation tends to go slightly more floral, but it's not rose, it's freesia. And it eventually ends up as a fruity vanilla musk, really, in the dry down. Whereas the older formulation stays pretty much as it was in the opening. It stays quite heavy on the musky rose with a touch of vanilla. It's a very, very sort of fermented feeling fragrance. It definitely has that blackcurrant as well. People describe the old formulation as being like a wine or a fermented beer. It definitely has that sort of syrupy blackcurrant, but with that heavy background of the patchouli, the vanilla and the musk. Also, the lasting power is really reflected by that heavier feel. So the lasting power on the old formulation is a lot longer than the new formulation, but I would say that out of these two, there's not really that much difference in the amount of projection that you get whilst the fragrances are on your skin. So what did I think about these two fragrances? Well, I think your preference for which one you're going to like better is going to be determined by your familiarity with the old one, and also just about how you feel about patchouli. I feel like the new one is definitely the more modern feeling fragrance. It's lighter, it's brighter, it's got much less patchouli. Patchouli is something that's really gone out of fashion in fragrance. It was everywhere when C was launched in 2013. And this heavier style is sort of on its way out, really, I think, with designer fragrances. I think that's maybe why they've changed C. They've definitely chosen to go in a lot fruitier and a lot lighter path with a lot of the flankers that they've been releasing recently. In the new version of the fragrance, the rose and the patchouli and the woods are almost non-existent. I really don't see how these two fragrances can still be named the same thing because they are really, really different to each other. So which of these two do I prefer? Well, I'm just going to say that C, the old formulation, is a fragrance that I've thought about decluttering several times. And it's one that I always, when I wear it, I think, oh, you know what, I actually really do like this. But I also feel like it makes me feel older than I am. So it's not really one that I reach for regularly, and it's also not one that I have really fond memories of. I don't feel a great attachment to the old formulation. But I think the thing about it that was distinctive was that really fermented, really syrupy blackcurrant and that really rich, musky, woody patchouli dry down. It's just a very sort of enveloping kind of huggy fragrance, isn't it, this one? It's very heavy. Whereas I think this new one is just too light and bright. It just doesn't feel like C. It feels like something completely different, and I think it's just made it very much more generic. It's just something that you can find in other fragrances. So just from an originality point of view, and also from the fact that this older formulation lasts much longer than the new formulation, I would choose the old formulation over the new formulation. So obviously the question to answer as well for people who are coming to the ends of their old formulation bottles, should you bother with actually trying this fragrance before you repurchase? For sure, you should definitely retry this fragrance because they are so different, and I just wouldn't want anybody to be disappointed by their next purchase of this fragrance. If this is your favourite fragrance, then you need to try the new formulation before you make any more purchases because it is entirely different. So that's Armani Si. So the next fragrance that I'm going to compare is Mugler's Angel. So I have this old bottle, and I think this bottle dates from around 2004. Unfortunately, Mugler has been taken over by L'Oreal, and they've changed the batch code checkers to the L'Oreal standard dates. So I can't check the age of this bottle because the batch codes don't match anymore to the new L'Oreal codes. I also have this brand new sample of Mugler EDP from this year, so a 2022 versus something that's probably likely just before 2004, and I can tell it's before 2004 because of the signature down the side on the bottle. It's still slanting. So this fragrance, let me just run through my results with the blind sniffing and also the results from other people who smelt this fragrance. So out of my blind sniffing, I correctly identified the old formulation 3 times out of 3. Although I will say these two fragrances are much more similar than the Armani Si fragrance. This was a much harder call than Armani Si, especially in the opening and in the far dry down of the fragrances. So the older formulation fragrance has a very spicy and earthy start. I also smell something quite green, something that smells to me like pineapple leaves or some kind of leaf of some fruit. The older formulation then goes to a really dark, caramelized, chocolatey patchouli as it dries down. It's got a feeling of caramelized brown sugar. It's really ambery and warm. It's maybe even a little licoricey, but it maintains that earthiness with a touch of sweetness, and it teeters on the edge of something resembling body odour, but it never quite goes over the side, if you know what I mean. It always stays back on the edge, but you're always sniffing for more because you're not quite sure exactly whether it is or whether it isn't. The new formulation has a much stronger, sort of almost alcohol-y start. I imagine that I'm just, sniffing way before I should do with this fragrance. It's probably not something to even mention, but I do get a bit of a blast of alcohol when this is first sprayed. It also has a slight feeling of a bit of sort of plasticky patchouli about it, which is something I'm quite sensitive to. And I don't really get that at all in the old formulation bottle, but I do get that in the new formulation. The new one also smells a little bit of light honey, and also it has that green leaf smell, but it's more of a piney smell this time. The newer one is much sweeter in a non-chocolatey way, in like a more of a sugary kind of saccharine way. And it's something that also has a feeling of synthetic fruit about it, like berries or something. The patchouli in the new one turns towards body odour quite quickly, and it's something that does reverse, but it happens much earlier in the fragrance than in the old formulation. Eventually, the patchouli in the new formulation is overtaken by a feeling of caramel, fruitiness, jasmine, and vanilla. The dry down of the new formulation is much lighter, there's much less patchouli, and it's also much more sugary sweet than the old formulation. It actually makes me think of a flat raspberry aid or something like that. It's that kind of smell. So what did the other people say about these fragrances when I gave them these to test? Well, both of them said that these fragrances were really quite similar. And I get that. If you're not smelling the older Angel and really familiar with that, these two fragrances are quite similar in a way. I think as well, you see that when people compare things like Fatale Intense by Agent Provocateur. Those two fragrances to me are extremely different, but that's as somebody who really enjoys Angel, not as somebody who hates Angel. I think if you hate Angel, these two fragrances are going to be quite similar because you just don't pick up on the nuances of the fragrances because you're just not interested. So how about the lasting power of these two fragrances? Well, I'd say that the new one and the old one both last a decent amount of time, but the old one does outlast the new one by literally days, especially on clothing. The new one though, you can't complain, it does last. I'd say as well, the projection on these two is really not that bad for the new formulation, but the old formulation again does win out. And the new formulation, I'd put it like this. I'd say that I wouldn't be scared of wearing this one in a lift because it's just not that kind of nuclear feeling that you get with the old one. And sometimes the old one can be a bit too much. It's a bit in your face Angel sometimes. And sometimes I don't want to wear Angel because I don't want to leave a humongous trail and, only smell of patchouli, etc. But sometimes that's just really nice, isn't it? It's very comforting, Angel, in a way. So which out of these two do I prefer? Well, I really hate myself saying this, but I really prefer the old one. And I can't really pinpoint exactly why. I think it's something to do with just how the patchouli smells. In this one, it just smells more caramelized, it's more chocolatey, it's just a deeper fragrance in some respects. It's like the notes in these two fragrances are both there, but they're just kind of, again, jumbled up. They just don't have the balance in the new formulation that they have in the old formulation. And I think it's maybe my familiarity with the old formulation that's giving me that bias. I think if you tried this new formulation, you'd never tried Old Angel, there would be absolutely no problem with it. It would just be something that, you just accept. But it's just because I've tried the old formulation. And I do think they're noticeably different. So when it comes to repurchasing, what am I going to do? Am I going to look for an old formulation bottle or am I going to try a new formulation bottle? Based on this sample, I would always try and find an old formulation bottle. But I bet by the time I finish this fragrance, they will be long gone. So, this will probably be my last bottle of Angel. So that's Mugler's or Thierry Mugler's Angel. So the final fragrance is actually probably the one that annoys the most people, actually, this reformulation, and most people know about. So if you know Alien, you will know that it's been reformulated a number of times since it was released in 2005. Actually, Thierry Mugler sold his company to Clarins, and there were a few reformulations while Clarins owned Mugler. But also when Clarins sold Mugler to L'Oreal in 2020, there was a very notable reformulation, and a lot of people noticed and were very, very outspoken about the reformulation. I actually came to Alien pretty late in life. I remember, you know, in my youth, I didn't really get with Alien. I didn't really understand it. It was something that was just quite a lot for me. And it's really only, you know, coming back to Alien later on in life when I started Perfume YouTube that I really started to enjoy it. So my bottle dates from June 2020. So I clearly have the reformulated version. And I was just so curious about this fragrance that I sought out the old formulation. So I managed to find a really old formulation bottle back in January of 2022. And I was so pleased to find this. So again, because of the Mugler lot numbers and L'Oreal lot numbers not matching, it's impossible for me to check the date of this fragrance. But I believe this is one of the earliest formulation refill bottles of Alien. So actually comparing these two and giving them to other people to try, what did they think? So what about the blind sniff test? Could I tell which was the old formulation and which was the new formulation? Well, yes, I could. I got it right out 3 out of 3, because the opening of the old one is really, really distinctive. And actually, even in the dry down, there are noticeable differences. And it's something that I think if you don't like Alien and you're not really familiar with Alien, then you won't pick up on those differences quite as much. But if you know Alien, you will immediately notice the difference. So when I gave these two to other people to smell, if they didn't catch the opening, they could not tell the difference between these two fragrances. One person I gave the fragrances to, I let them smell the opening. The other one, I just let them smell the dry down. The one that smelled the opening immediately knew that they were different fragrances. The other person didn't know they were different fragrances. So I think that really shows you where the differences are in this fragrance's lifetime. I think that just is an interesting point, and that's why I did that. So yeah, it depends on which stage of the fragrance you're smelling with this one, I think, if you're not an Alien hardcore fan. So let's talk a little bit more about what they actually smell like. So the older formulation and the newer formulation, the biggest noticeable difference before you even smell them is the colour of the fragrance. So the new one is almost colourless. And the old one, when you look at my decant, is actually a very golden kind of caramelised brown colour. So yeah, that's a very noticeable difference before you even spray them. So how do these two smell? Well, the new one is much friendlier. So it's a much calmed down version of Alien. If you don't like Alien, you are probably going to more tolerate the newer version than the old version. It's just a little bit quieter. It's still quite loud, but it's just soapier, it's greener, and it's just a flatter feeling jasmine. It just doesn't have that oomph. The old one is just wow. The old one is immediately discernible because it has this jasmine in it that just has an almost methylated feel. It definitely has like a feeling, almost like something you would use to clear a cold with. It's that kind of menthol kind of smell, but in jasmine. The jasmine here is really hypnotic, it's really heady, it's really fuzzy and sweet. As the new reformulated version dries, the jasmine really eases off the pedal. It really becomes a lot soapier, a lot greener, and just less strong generally. It also becomes a little bit musky, and the muskiness here is something that actually makes me want to swallow when I inhale. And I guess that's something that I'm not entirely enjoying. I've never really actually had that before. There's something here that just irritates my throat slightly. The older fragrance is just somehow sweeter and richer throughout, but in the dry down, you definitely get a feeling of vanilla. It's almost balsamic and resinous in a way, and the cashmerean is definitely present, but it's not bothersome. It's something that is really quite soft and pillowy. I guess that's just really it. The older Alien is just smoother and just richer in a way. Story of all these reformulations, I'm afraid. The older one is just deeper and richer and smoother. So these two, I did test the longevity and I did test the projection. I'd say longevity wise, they are pretty similar. The older one does edge out the new one, and I'd say with the projection, the older one definitely wins. The older one I got whiffs of throughout the day. If I wore these two fragrances, like one on each arm, the one that I would be smelling would be the old one. The old one just seemed to give off like an aura, Whereas the new one, you didn't really get that quite so much, and I just felt like I needed to spray a bit more all the time with the new one. So which out of these two, you can probably guess, do I prefer? Well, I'm afraid, again, I prefer the older formulation. I'm really, really sad about this because this isn't good news, is it? I just really ultimately prefer the older one. I think actually, you know, these two, unless you're actually sniffing them side by side, you probably won't really notice unless you smell the opening. The menthol jasmine bit at the beginning is really very distinctive and is really what discerns the old formulation from the new formulation. But that soapy jasmine thing that goes on in the rest of the fragrance is also quite different. And if you're looking for it, you will smell it. So yeah, I'm kind of kicking myself because when I first bought this fragrance, I was perfectly happy with it. And I just opened Pandora's box by seeking out this old formulation. And really, you know, the likelihood of me finding an old bottle of Alien now, especially one this old, is pretty much zero. So yeah, I feel like I've really shot myself in the foot here because, you know, I'm never going to enjoy Alien anymore, am I, unless I find an old formulation. I think the problem was that trying the old one made me realise just how different the jasmine is. The jasmine in the new one just feels flatter and greener and soapier. So I'd say if you do happen on a bottle of Alien that was manufactured prior to 2020, then I would definitely go out and try it. And if you can find a super old one like this one, then definitely grab it. But, you know, if you've never tried an old formulation Alien and you're perfectly happy with the new one, just stick with it because you honestly don't want to know the differences between these two fragrances because you probably won't enjoy the new one anymore if you try the old one. So I'm sorry to say all that, but that's Alien by Mugler. So in summary, I'd just really like to apologise for the fact that I like and prefer the older formulations over the new formulations. It really isn't good news, is it? Because I wanted to like the new formulations because those are the ones that I can get my hands on. Whereas the older formulations are really, they're things in the past, they're things that are going to go. And it's really sad that I think they're the better fragrances. I'm just really upset. So please let me know if you've tried both formulations of any of these fragrances or if you've tried two different formulations of any other fragrance that you'd like to tell me about. And let me know which of the formulations you preferred. You know, we're all different. Some people may prefer the newer formulations. There may be very valid reasons for that. There may be a different balance of notes or there may be some emphasis on a note that people ultimately prefer. Please let me know down below. And also, if you have enjoyed the video, please press the like button and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.